They say the wind in Norfolk cuts sharper in winter, but for me it was the silence that did the carving. I'd been gone for 4 years. Not from the world, just from the version of it that made noise. I traded encrypted channels and burner phones for wind-lashed fields and broken fences. Out here, no one asked questions. The postman never made eye contact, and the neighbors knew better than to knock on a cottage with no curtains. But the past has its own sense of direction, and somehow it always finds the door. It was a Tuesday. I remember because the dog across the lane didn't bark. He always barked on Tuesdays. I was chopping wood behind the cottage when the phone rang. Not the landline, not the decoy mobile. The black one, the one I hadn't touched since London burned everything I'd built. 3 vibrations. No caller ID. My hand hovered, and then I answered. "Talia, it's me." The voice was tight, controlled, but I knew panic when it was dressed in a suit. "Noah, they're saying I leaked documents. Cabinet level. They froze my access. MI5's already called in their liaison. Talia, they're using your name. From before." My breath clouded in front of me. Everything around me, snowbark air, suddenly felt like glass. One wrong move and it would all shatter. "Who has the documents?" I asked. He hesitated. "I don't know. But the metadata traces back to Black Fen." Black Fen. That wasn't a place. It was a code name. One attached to a failed counter-surveillance mission I ran in 2015 before I lost my clearance, before they pushed me out and told me to keep quiet, or they'd make sure I never spoke again. I gripped the phone tighter. "You haven't spoken to anyone else?" No, I didn't know who else to call. I could hear it then, the fear under his voice. Not of arrest. Noah had backbone. No, this was a different fear. The kind that seeps in when you realize the thing coming for you isn't a person. It's a machine, a system. And once it locks on, it doesn't stop. I looked out over the field. The gray sky dipped low like it was listening. I had buried so much out here. Faces, files, decisions. I told myself I didn't miss London or the life I left, but this wasn't about me anymore. They were using my past to burn down his future. When the call ended, I didn't move. Not for seconds. Maybe minutes. I just stared at the axe still lodged in the chopping block. Wind stirred the frost at my feet. My breath came back sharp. Someone had unzipped a sealed file, figuratively or literally, and now it was breathing. Noah wasn't just collateral. He was bait. And whoever set the trap knew exactly which ghosts they'd be summoning. I stepped inside. The coat I hadn't worn in years still hung on the wall like it was waiting. So did the locked case under the floorboard. I pulled it out, wiped off the dust, and felt the familiar weight settle into my hands. As I clicked it open, one question rose above all the others, clearer than the wind, louder than the silence. Who reached into my past? And why now? London didn't welcome me back. It watched. The city hadn't changed. Still glass and shadow. Still the sound of ambition grinding under its own weight. But I moved through it like I'd been peeled out of its system. Unregistered. Uninvited. No official clearance, no name on any door. Just an old ID chip and a face they'd buried. The safe house in Lambeth still worked barely. A code burned into my memory, and a retinal scan that hadn't expired. I entered with gloves on. The kind of place where the light hums just a second too long, like it's thinking before it flickers on. I didn't unpack. Just pulled the terminal from under the floorboard and hardlined into a channel I shouldn't still have access to. The breach report on Noah had spread quietly but purposefully, no official headlines, just whispers in the right corridors. A controlled burn. It took me 27 seconds to find the file. What they were using against him. The encryption was old familiar, my own protocols. The kind MI5 phased out years ago. Sloppy work or intentional, I cracked the wrapper and it hit me. It was the ops summary from Black Fen. Redacted lines, pixelated drone footage, asset lists tagged with foreign identifiers, just enough to look like political subversion, just enough to be dangerous. And at the top of the dock, a digital fingerprint. Mine. I leaned back, chest tight. They hadn't faked it. They'd resurrected it. Black Fen wasn't just a failure. It was a cover-up. A silent one. No explosions, no headlines. Just one man dead, one informant vanished, and one junior agent me told to shut up and take the blame. I hadn't looked at that file since they locked my clearance. Now it was back, rewritten, weaponized, and Noah's name had been sloppily stitched into the after-action report. The implication was clear that he'd accessed and sold intel connected to Black Fen via his parliamentary channels. Fabricated just enough to pass a sniff test, but hollow underneath. Noah would never even know what Black Fen was, which meant someone didn't care if the story fell apart later. They only needed the explosion now. I stared at the screen until the lines blurred. This wasn't about him, this was about me. I ran a trace on the source node hoping for a breadcrumb anything. What came up was worse. The origin server was masked through 4 countries, but the final relay internal. A subdirectory routed through a legacy MI5 archive, one restricted to former Tier 3 operatives. Someone with old access. Someone who knew exactly where my ghosts were buried. I pushed deeper. The packet metadata showed the file had been lifted 6 days ago, right before Noah's last closed-door session on electoral transparency. It wasn't random. It was timing. My fingers hovered over the keys. The itch behind my skull returned the one that always came before an op turned. I knew this playbook. Create noise. Discredit the bloodline. Smear the old asset while gutting the new one. 2 birds. 1 cut. But why now? Why him? I yanked my gloves off and pulled up a second layer, checking the distribution matrix. It had been quietly shared to 3 parties, 1 think tank in Brussels, a private security firm in Ottawa, and a digital media contractor listed in the metadata as ALR Stratcoms. I froze. That alias hadn't shown up since Tangier. Since Ellis's father vanished. He'd been tracking them for years. And now the same name was tied to this leak. Suddenly, everything sharpened. The wrongness in Noah's voice, the pressure in my chest, the smell of rot beneath clean suits. Someone had spent years setting up this fall. I shut the laptop, stood, and stared out the narrow safe-house window. Red tail lights blurred across the street. The world moved like it didn't just try to erase my brother, but something in me cracked then quietly, like ice under pressure. I was never meant to see that file again, and whoever brought it back into play wasn't trying to punish me. They were trying to remind me they still could. The first time I saw the name Orin Data Systems, it was on a footer, a forgotten trace in the metadata string of the leak that framed Noah. No logo, no tagline, just 5 words. Property of Orin Data Systems, Inc. It wasn't a British entity. The IP chain routed through Ontario. From Lambeth, it was just 5 hours and a passport swipe away. I boarded the red-eye to Toronto, using one of my last clean identities, Marla Densmore Research Fellow from Cambridge, ironically. The flight was mostly empty. I didn't sleep. I watched a map inch across the Atlantic while the lights hummed too loud too long. That's when I remembered what they used to call outfits like Orin Stateless Operators. Companies that existed in law, but nowhere else. Their headquarters were server racks, their board meetings encrypted bursts across multiple time zones. Untouchable. Unrooted. At Pearson, I didn't stop to breathe. I bypassed the cab line and took a pre-registered bike courier, just like we used to run surveillance sweeps. Movement is harder to track than stillness. By 9:00 a.m., I was in the financial district. It all looked normal. Too normal. A glass tower with a corporate directory in polished brass. Orin's name wasn't listed, but a shell firm, Maple 8 Strategies, was. That was enough. The receptionist barely looked up when I walked past. I had 30 seconds before someone asked for ID. I didn't need more than 10. Second floor. Left hallway. Door marked Private Contractor Zone. A biometric scanner with a Canadian standard flash. I dropped a decoy keycard into the reader and plugged a ghost drive into the back panel. I held my breath. Green light. The door clicked open like it wanted to be discovered. Inside, the lights were low. Screens lined one wall, muted footage of campaign rallies, flag-draped podiums, smiling politicians. But none of them matched their captions. The names were real, the speeches were real, but the faces were just a little off. Too symmetrical, too smooth. Synthetic. I moved closer. One screen flickered and I caught a frame that made my blood tighten. Noah. Standing at a town hall in East London, apparently saying words I knew he'd never said. "We must normalize data exchange with cross-border AI entities," the audio stated calmly, even at the cost of legacy protocol. The phrasing was precise, bureaucratic, and completely false. He never gave that speech. That venue didn't exist, and I recognized the body language. It wasn't his. It was built. They had deepfaked him into saying something that could legally justify surveillance. Data handoff. Treason. I stepped back, my heart a pressure bomb behind my ribs. This wasn't about Noah specifically. He was just the perfect face at the perfect time. Young, idealistic, and now compromised in digital perpetuity. Oren wasn't just manipulating data. They were rewriting public memory. I copied as much footage as I could before the ghost drive blinked red storage full. I was nearly out the door when I heard footsteps. I ducked into the maintenance stairwell, waited for the sound to fade, then slipped back onto the street. The footage wasn't just damning. It was timed. All of it was preloaded to drop during the parliamentary ethics review in 2 weeks. The purpose wasn't to destroy Noah now. It was to weaken him. Slowly, systematically, until no one trusted him enough to listen. By the time I crossed the border into Quebec, the snow had turned wet and mean. Montreal was colder in every way. Colder air, colder stairs. I met my contact at a cafe near the old port, a man named Bouchard, not his real name. He once built routing protocols for MI6 before defecting to freelance asset tracing. He owed me one. "I need everything on Oren's internal structure," I told him. He blinked twice. No questions, just typed. When the first cluster of files landed on my screen, it felt like watching a crime scene unfold in slow motion. Oren data systems didn't legally exist in Canada. But 3 years ago, they acquired a majority stake in a Montreal-based analytics firm, ValenQ Research. ValenQ had 2 specialties: synthetic identity modeling and behavioral manipulation algorithms for political campaigns. One of their earliest projects, a pilot study on emotional resonance in voters across 2 continents, Europe and North America. Suddenly it snapped into place. Black Fen. The operation I'd buried. The data profiles we scraped from intercepted communications. That raw metadata had been sold, repackaged, fed into Oren's modeling system. They'd used our surveillance ops as a baseline to build synthetic personas, and now they were running those personas in real time across global elections. ValenQ's Montreal office was located in an old converted factory near Mile End. I waited until after midnight. No guards, just motion lights and a keypad entry. I used a bypass loop to short the system and slipped inside. The server room pulsed with a quiet, steady rhythm like a heartbeat. I followed it. Rows of machines. No signs, no branding. But the screens didn't lie. Charts. Language clusters. Eye-tracking overlays. Millions of data points scrolling faster than I could process. One screen showed a candidate in New Hampshire, another in Brussels, then Madrid, Lagos, Ottawa, all saying the same phrases. Not identical, but algorithmically harmonized. shaped to fit local narratives while reinforcing global consensus. Oren was manufacturing ideological alignment, not persuasion, fabrication. And every one of their targets had the same vulnerability, some digital shadow from the past. Something buried or classified or sealed. That's why they came for Noah. They weren't just trying to kill his career. They were trying to test how fast public trust could collapse under synthetic weight. My pulse thudded in my ears. This wasn't disinformation. It was biodigital warfare. No missiles, just code and memory. I downloaded what I could safely slowly. But as I moved to leave, I noticed a folder open in the corner of one workstation. Archive Whitaker Trail. My name. Inside image logs. Surveillance footage. My last known location in Norfolk. A still frame of Noah entering Parliament. A GPS tag near the cottage. And a subfolder marked Ellis Monroe, Tier 2 linked asset. I stopped breathing. They'd been tracking both of us. Ellis, whose father vanished, chasing the same firm back in 1999. Ellis, who'd once told me that disinformation doesn't spread through lies. It spreads through loneliness, through silence. They were trying to isolate us, break our threads before we could even tie them together. I closed the window and erased the log of my presence, slipped out into the snow. Montreal glared around me, cold steel and black water under frozen light. I didn't call Ellis, not yet. But as I boarded the train out of the city, one thought pulsed beneath the rush of wheels. Whoever built Oren wasn't after power. They were after reality itself. The knock came at 2:14 a.m. No phone call, no message. Just 3 short taps against the fire escape door of the Montreal flat I was crashing in an abandoned sublet above a locksmith shop in Milex. I didn't move right away. I just stood in the dark, hand on the pistol under the sink. A 4th knock, slower, deliberate. I opened the door 1 inch. He didn't speak, just pulled his scarf down and looked at me like he was looking at a decision he hadn't fully made yet. Ellis Monroe. Eyes sharp behind tired edges, snow melting in his collar. He hadn't shaved in days. "You tagged me," he said, "in the Q logs." "You were already in there," I replied. "They've been watching you longer than you think." He didn't flinch, just stepped inside and pulled a flash drive from his coat pocket. I got the other half. We didn't shake hands. We didn't need to. Whatever this was, revenge duty, damage control, it didn't require ceremony. It required proof. Ellis's father, Declan Monroe, disappeared in 1999 after blowing the whistle on a cyber surveillance trial run through NATO subcontractors. They called it a heart attack. The death certificate was issued before the autopsy. He was the reason Ellis became a journalist. He was the reason Ellis never trusted a single version of the truth that came packaged with a press release. "What's on the drive?" I asked. "File reconstruction logs from an Oren satellite server. There's a traceable fingerprint connecting them to Black Fen." I exhaled slowly. "That's the break." He nodded. "If we can get the original dump the live instance, they won't be able to claim fabrication. I think it's stored in the old tram depot. Sector 14. I blinked. "That's a ghost facility." "Exactly." 20 minutes later, we were cutting across snow-drifted streets in silence. He drove like a man who didn't trust brakes. His car was a rental under a dead journalist's alias. I didn't ask which one. The depot sat behind chain link and salt-stained concrete 5 blocks from the river. Long since decommissioned. No heat, no security cameras. Just one silent motion sensor tripped if you didn't enter at a specific 37-second window between perimeter scans. We made it in at 34. Inside, the silence was heavy. Not absence of sound silence, watched silence. Lights pulsed from deep within a steel door marked Archive B. The lock panel blinked red until Ellis slid a hardware sniffer into the port and whispered, "Give me 15. You get 5. We moved like we had done this before. Maybe not together, but in parallel lives. Mine wrapped in government black, his buried in classified leaks and late-night edits. The door opened. Inside rows of drives mounted to modular cradles, temp-controlled, isolated. Ellis reached for one, but I caught his wrist. Not that one. Use mine. I handed him the clone array I'd prepped earlier. Plugged in, watched the progress bar crawl. While it downloaded, he turned to me. They're planning something bigger. I know. No, I mean bigger than we think. He hesitated. You saw the speech simulations? I nodded. They're not just targeting NOAA. I found simulations of cabinet ministers, UN envoys, defense secretaries. Some of them are already live. I didn't ask how he knew. I didn't want to hear the answer. Once we release this, he said, they'll know we were here. They already do. The last file ticked to 100%. I pulled the drive and wiped the log manually. Ellis stood guard while I pried open a floor panel and dropped in a tracker lure just in case they came looking. When we slipped back into the cold, we didn't say anything for a while. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long, crooked shadows. It smelled like copper and snow, and something older like memory burning. In that moment I felt it. Not relief, not victory, but alignment. Ellis wasn't a contact anymore. He wasn't even a witness. He was a mirror. Broken in different ways, but reflecting the same truth. We weren't just here to expose a system. We were here to dismantle the illusion it used to survive. The first shot shattered the window. It wasn't random. It was a message: don't run, just bleed quietly. Ellis and I dropped low breath, fogging the air inside the abandoned relay station east of downtown Montreal. The place was supposed to be dead concrete shell-broken antenna arrays, rusted signal racks. But the door hadn't squeaked when we came in. That was the first sign. The second was the faint hum behind the walls, something still pulsing, waiting like the building remembered how to listen. They found us faster than I expected, which meant we'd triggered something we didn't know we were carrying. Ellis slid behind a metal cabinet and tossed me the encrypted drive. If they breach you, run. I didn't answer. Another round cracked through the far wall, splintering dust and silence. Boots scraped gravel outside. 3 of them, maybe 4. Clean movement. No panic. These weren't thugs, they were trained. Contract ghosts. The kind you don't find in databases because they're not meant to exist. We had 30 seconds, maybe less. I pressed my back to the wall, felt for the auxiliary fuse panel beneath the receiver mount, and snapped the breaker. The whole place went black. Then I reached behind the cabinet and hit the red switch. Ellis tensed. What did you just do? Gave us leverage. Deep in the station's core, a buried back channel lit up one of the few perks of having once overseen infrastructure infiltration in 6 countries. Old systems forget to purge ghosts. This one still had a direct line to a repeater node in Quebec's defense grid. Not enough to call for help, but enough to ping. Within seconds, one of the men outside answered, not with words, but with a voice I knew too well. Stand down, Agent Whitaker. I froze. The voice came through a cracked speaker above the exit door. Calm, flat, surgical. You're surrounded. You're not the target, but you're interfering. That makes you inconvenient, Ellis whispered. Who the hell is that? My hands shook as I stepped toward the speaker. Confirm ID. Silence. Then you called me Raven once. Do you remember why? My throat clenched. The room tilted not physically, but memory broke the floor. Raven. Codename for Julian Marsden. My handler. My instructor. The man who trained me to disappear between border crossings, to lie under torture, to read a kill order in a glance. He was also the one who signed off on the Black Fen sanitization. You're alive, I said. Not in ways that matter, he replied. Static hissed through the line. You were supposed to stay buried, Talia. They gave you the gift of silence. You should have taken it. And you should have stayed dead, I snapped. Ellis looked at me like he was hearing 2 languages at once. You knew him? He built me, I muttered. Then broke everything I used to believe in. Another pause from the speaker. Then, this isn't personal. The system outgrew the leash. We just taught it how to breathe. I looked at Ellis. He's not protecting the machine. He is the machine. Another bullet tore through the ventilation shaft above. I shoved Ellis toward the service crawl. Back door. Now. But he won't kill me. Not yet. He wants me to understand first. Ellis slid into the dark. I turned back to the panel. Marsden. I said, what's the end game? The speaker crackled. Control is obsolete. Influence is cleaner. The future isn't about who owns the truth. It's about who writes the memory. You used my past to rewrite Noah's, I said. To poison what he hasn't even done yet. No, Marsden replied. We used your silence. I stared at the cracked terminal. Somewhere his face was watching. Somewhere he thought I was still the girl who followed orders because truth made too much noise. But I'd learned something in the years he disappeared. Silence can cut just as deep as violence if you know where to aim. I rerouted the ping, locked onto his signal origin, then smiled cold and sure. You taught me everything I know, I whispered. But you never taught me what I'd become when I stopped believing you. Then I hit send, and the system remembered me. The station in Manchester was nearly empty by the time I arrived. No cameras. Just the low hum of vending machines and the flicker of dying fluorescent light. The kind of place that looked like it had forgotten how to feel safe. Trains came and went, but nobody noticed. That's why I chose it. The woman on the bench wore a gray coat sleeves frayed. Nothing about her said important. That was the point. She worked in electoral logistics, middle tier, no public face. Her name never showed up in press briefings, but she had back-end clearance. Enough to verify the chain of custody on digital evidence without triggering alerts. And more importantly, she'd lost her brother to a disinformation campaign during the last European election. No one prosecuted it. No one even investigated. So when the package showed up on her encrypted drop metadata server, ping synthetic ID logs, voice overlays the raw code that linked Oren to government contractor pipelines she didn't question where it came from. She just replied, I believe you. Let's burn it down quietly. I never spoke to her. I never saw her face clearly. But I watched from across the platform as she slipped the drive into her coat pocket and walked away. No fanfare, no headlines. But a fuse had been lit. 3 days later, during a closed ethics committee session, the evidence surfaced clean, traceable, authenticated by a third-party electoral integrity firm. The case against Noah unraveled within minutes. The fabricated deepfake was exposed. The leak's origin traced to an anonymous third-party source with legacy access to Tier 3 surveillance material. The wording was surgical. Noah was reinstated, his name cleared, but he never called me, and I understood why. Because even if the system had been dismantled from within, even if the lie had been buried, the scar of almost being destroyed by someone else's silence doesn't fade just because truth shows up late. He knew it was me. Of course he did. But sometimes knowing isn't the same as forgiving, and I hadn't earned that. Not yet. Back in London, I watched the fallout unfold like aftershocks on quiet screens. Oren's holdings collapsed in 72 hours. Valen Q declared insolvency. A string of offshore shells filed deregistration in the Caymans, but no arrests were made, no press conference, no justice wrapped in ribbon, because that wasn't the point. Justice in the world I came from rarely comes in daylight. It comes in shadows, in decisions that can't be traced, in moments like this where the right thing gets done by the wrong person in the right way. Ellis vanished. Off-grid. He sent a single message before wiping his signature entirely from the comms thread. You did what they trained you for, but not the way they wanted. He was right. For years I was built to carry secrets, to hold them close, weaponize them when told, bury them when not. But this time, I let one go, and it saved someone who still had a future. That mattered more than the silence I kept to get here. The system didn't collapse, not fully. It never does. But one of its arteries ruptured, and I didn't need credit to know it was bleeding. The wind hadn't changed. Back in Norfolk, it still slid through the trees like it remembered every secret I tried to bury. The fields behind the cottage were brittle with frost. The axe was still where I left it, half sunk in the chopping block, as if no time had passed. But something in me had shifted. quietly, permanently. Inside, I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need to see the space to remember it. The creaking floorboards, the silence that used to feel like exile, now folded into something closer to peace. I sat at the old desk by the window, pulled out the recorder Ellis gave me in Montreal. It was scratched, dented, held together with tape, but it worked. Of course it did. I pressed record. "Hey," I said softly. "If you're hearing this, it means I'm done." A pause. Not with the fight. That never ends. Just with being in front of it. Outside, a crow passed low across the sky. I waited until its cry faded before continuing. I used to think silence was a punishment, that stepping away meant surrender. But now I know it's a choice. And sometimes it's the only one that doesn't come with strings. My voice wavered just once. I didn't need them to know it was me. I just needed to make sure it was done right. I reached over, opened the drawer, and placed the drive, the last drive, the one no one else would ever find, deep beneath the floorboard. Not hidden, just resting. You once told me the system only fears people it can't place. I think it finally can't place me. I let the silence sit. Then I said the last part. Not everyone needs to stand in the light to make justice happen. Some of us were meant to move through the dark quietly and leave the door open behind us. I clicked stop. Outside, the sun hadn't risen, but the horizon had softened, enough to see the edges of things again. I made tea, left the recorder on the table, and for the first time in years, I let myself sit, no exit strategy, no coded message in my pocket, just breath and stillness and the sound of nothing breaking. That was enough.